Self-awareness has to be one of the biggest management and leadership buzzwords in the industry right now, but for very good reason. You probably already know that it is a critical component to personal development and business success, and research has shown that we are more effective leaders, we have more satisfied employees, and we have more profitable companies when we are self-aware. There's just one little catch. While we all think that we are self-aware individuals, studies actually show that only 10 to 15% of people actually meet the criteria for self-awareness. Oh boy. Well, to unravel this whole self-awareness mystery, we have one heck of a guest. Her name is Dr. Tasha Eurich. She's an organizational psychologist and a New York Times best-selling author. Oh yeah. And she's going to talk about why self-awareness is so important. How do we evaluate our own self-awareness? And maybe most importantly, how can businesses benefit by emphasizing, developing, and cultivating self-awareness within their organization? Yes, it's going to be fun. Cannot wait. My name is Eric Pila. I am the host of the Benefits Buzz podcast. I am joined as always by my co-host, Kelsey Burgad. Ready, set, let's get buzzed. Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Benefits Buzz. I gotta say, I'm extremely giddy. I'm gonna use the word giddy here about this episode. I love all our podcast episodes. Like, you're supposed to love all your children the same. But in reality, there's always that one child that you just kind of coddle a bit more or care or brag about more. And I feel like this is that episode for me.
100%.
And I'm so what?
100%.
I know, right? I know. I hate to say it out loud now that it's, on the digital airwaves, but it's so true. And this is such a cool episode, though. We're going to be talking about self-awareness. And we have, a stellar guest that I'm so excited that could be on the show today. Her name is Dr. Tasha Eurich. She's an organizational psychologist, a researcher, and a New York Times bestselling author. And might I add, I've seen her present and do a keynote, and she's a phenomenal at that too. There's nothing she can't do, ladies and gentlemen. Tasha, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's hard to live up to. Great to be here.
Now that I set expectations really high, right? Well, we're super excited you're on the show. This is a really fun topic, as you couldn't tell from my intro. I'm really pumped about it. Just something I've always found super fascinating. And I know our human resource professionals that are listening are equally excited about self-awareness. And so I think before we get to dive into the details around what does it mean and the different kinds of self-awareness, I love just to take a quick pause, and I want everyone just to kind of get to know you as a person. How did you find yourself? How did you garner all those wonderful accolades? And what do you love most about what you're doing right now?
Oh my gosh, there's so much to that. So I was really lucky to discover organizational psychology. It was my senior year of college. And I will never forget that first class I took. I literally said, this is what I was put on this earth to do. And with that certainty came so many great opportunities. I went to graduate school. I studied it, as you said, it's called industrial organizational psychology. I spent 5 years kind of in academia, teaching, researching. I spent a little more than that in the next phase of my life in corporate America, leading, global leadership development programs and employee engagement programs. And then I went out on my own about 10 years ago now. So this has just been an incredible journey, and I feel grateful to have experienced so many different facets of this field. But what I think I love about it most, it's honestly hard to choose. Here's the bottom line for me. I'm a third generation entrepreneur. I grew up literally following my mother around the business that she created and watching her be a leader in real time. And I think that business, if you approach it correctly, is the greatest personal growth tool there is. And being able to, most of the executive coaching I do is with CEOs and folks in the C-suite, and being able to see the ripple effect of if you can help one leader get better, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners agree, right? Seeing the ripple effect to make, the company better, to help employees be more excited about what they're doing, to build their livelihood. I see that really starting with growth and development, for everybody, but especially for the people in charge. And so I love to be a part of that. I work, again, I coach, I work with executive teams. I do a lot of, leadership development work. And that's kind of the thread that runs through it is business as the greatest growth tool.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. I love your story too. I wish I would have had that same epiphany moment in college. I feel like I just floundered through.
I was lucky. I don't know how it happened or why it happened, but I'm grateful.
That's amazing. And we all hope as parents that our kids look at us the way you described looking at your mom and following her around and, aspiring to meet her in her footsteps. So such a cool story.
Thank you. Yeah, she's great.
Are there any particular moments that stand out to you in the last 10 years as you've gone out on your own?
Oh my gosh. It's so funny because with the pandemic, everything feels so far away. It's like, what did I do before I was trapped in my house for 6 months?
Right.
But I think, maybe another way to look at this is like, what do I miss the most? I've been able to work virtually, like all of us have. We sort of have adapted. And what I really miss is being in a room, like with all the WEX sales folks, like we were in February, and just being able to share this research on self-awareness and giving people tools and feeling that energy. So I think, there's been a lot of highlights, but that's been probably the most rewarding part of it because it's immediate. You can see people getting excited about it. And when they come up afterwards and they say, this is going to help me solve a problem, there's really no greater satisfaction. I think we'd probably all agree about that.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, February was a lifetime ago, but I remember sitting in that room in Florida, listening to you speak. And I was just like, man, she is so smart. And I love the topic of self-awareness. I think it's so pivotal for people to know and understand themselves. So can you tell us a little bit and our listeners a little bit about what self-awareness is?
Definitely. And the preface to this is there's a lot of, I think self-awareness is a management buzzword. And so there's a lot out there. The way I come at this topic is as a scientist and a researcher. And that was partially why a little more than 7 years ago, I convened a research team to essentially answer the questions, what is self-awareness? Where does it come from? Why do we need it? How do we get more of it? Because I thought there was a lot of common wisdom out there, but I didn't actually know if the common wisdom was correct. And one of the first things we did, to your question, Kelsey, was look at what is self-awareness? We throw this term around usually in the negative, like, oh, my boss isn't very self-aware. But what does it actually mean? And it took us almost a year to empirically define it. We read, almost 1,000 journal articles. We surveyed people all around the world. We did interviews with people who didn't start out self-aware, but were able to build that skill in powerful ways. And here's what it came down to. Self-awareness is the will and the skill to understand who you are internally and how others see you externally. And a fascinating element of that is that those two types of self-knowledge, kind of knowing who I am and what matters to me, and then knowing how I show up in the world, are completely independent. So just because we have one doesn't necessarily mean we have the other. And the benefit of that is it charts the course for how do we get more self-aware. Those are sort of the two focus areas that we should all be looking at.
Yeah, those two things. And that was one of the things when I listened to you speak was that internal awareness versus external awareness and how we see each other versus how others see us. And I can't forget, it was like one of the funniest moments was like, how many people, think they're self-aware? And then people 90% of people raise your hand. And I think there's stats like, well, only 10 to 15% of people actually that you study in your research actually fit the criteria. So everyone kind of looks at each other like, what? Wait a second here. There's definitely a huge perception or difference between people who think they're self-aware and actually are. Could you kind of break that down a little bit in terms of how do we actually kind of discover our self-awareness and the perception of how we see ourselves versus, how others see us? I think is really fascinating.
Right. Yeah, the data are pretty stunning on that. You mentioned we found 95% of people think they're self-aware, only about 10 to 15% of us are. And, where that comes from, there's a lot to this, but sort of there's a lot of internal barriers we have. We're designed to see ourselves with rose-colored glasses. There's a lot of things about, why we do things we do that we can't access. And then on the outside, it's a world, kind of for all age groups everywhere in the world where people are tempted to become more self-absorbed and less self-aware. And one of the points I try to hammer home humorously, and including myself in this group, is that most of us, almost all of us, have more work to do than we think. So a good default assumption is, whether or not I think I'm self-aware, in some sense doesn't matter if I'm continuously curious to learn new things. And I mentioned this earlier with our group. We found 50 people, 50, from all around the world, no demographic consistencies, just all different types of people who didn't start out self-aware and who became highly, highly self-aware. And the common thread that we found with them was, what they did differently, in addition to making some smart strategic decisions about how to get that information, was that they always saw more room to grow. And one of by the way, we called them self-awareness unicorns because initially we weren't sure if we were going to find any, so somewhat jokingly, but the term stuck. He was a middle school science teacher, and he said, the most exciting part about self-awareness is that it's like exploring space. And what I think that means is no matter what we know, there's always more to discover. And I think that's the important piece is that this isn't about sort of beating ourselves up that we're not as self-aware as we think. It is maybe about questioning that assumption. Maybe I don't see myself as clearly as I want to believe, or maybe I have blind spots. Most of us do. I discovered a lot of mine in the course of this research. But that's what's so fun about it, I think.
Yeah, I love the term unicorns, right? And I think so. We're all hoping to become that unicorn, right?
Me too.
Right? One day, someday. And maybe that's the big, that's the big riddle we're trying to solve. And again, I think when I think about our listeners, right, they're responsible for, well, sure, there's obviously going to be some like, I want to understand and make sure I'm self-aware, right? But then also they're about developing their employees, right? So how can I make sure I'm having our leaders in our company and our managers that are in a company, and how do I help them become more self-aware? Or what are the things that I can do? So maybe in your experience, what separates, those leaders or individuals who are self-aware from those who aren't?
Yeah. So again, I think in addition to a lot of the tools that we have discovered that, kind of how to get there, it starts with a mindset. And the mindset has to be knowing is always better than not knowing. And I think a lot of the folks that are listening to this have also had this experience, but the higher you ascend in an organization, the higher up you are on the corporate food chain, the less self-aware you tend to be, not because you're less self-aware as a person or you started out that way, but because the way organizations are designed, power makes it difficult to get honest feedback. So what I've noticed in, again, my coaching clients that have made really dramatic improvements and just leaders in general is that constant openness. And one good example is my friend and one of my heroes, Alan Mulally. And Alan Mulally was the CEO who took Ford, starting in 2006, from the brink of bankruptcy to its second best year ever. And the first time I met him and I interviewed him for this book, we had this amazing conversation. I was like dying. He's like my Justin Bieber, and I was finally meeting him. And and at the end of the interview, he said, "Is it okay if we take a minute and see if you have any feedback for me?" And I was so floored, I almost fell over. I'm like, what in the world could, one of the greatest CEOs of all time learn from me, And I think that's just such a powerful example of those in the moment choices that we can help our leaders make. What I think is underpinning it, though, is knowing how important self-awareness is. And, a lot of people who are listening to this know this already, but it's not just nice to have. It is a business imperative. And what I found is starting there will help open leaders' minds a little bit more to just how much value there is in this journey.
That's so interesting. Something I hear at WEX quite frequently is when we're looking for new employees, we're looking for someone who has the mindset that they have not arrived, that there's always something to learn, always, room to grow. So I think it fits so well along with, this topic of self-awareness. As you're talking about these unicorns, I'm sure our listeners are thinking, well, how do I determine if I'm self-aware, or how do I see self-awareness in others?
Yep. So I'm actually going to give you a really practical suggestion. In the course of our research, it took a crazy long amount of time. We developed a 70-item empirically validated assessment of self-awareness. And what we learned is there's sort of two elements to this. Number one, you can't just talk in generalities. So you can't just say, are you self-aware? Because as we said earlier, most people will say, yeah, sure. We've discovered 7 different types of self-knowledge that separate the self-aware from everybody else. And some examples of that are values. Do you have clearly articulated principles that you live your life by? Do you know what your passions are? What are those things that make you leap out of bed in the morning? Do you understand your patterns of behavior over time? Do you know what your impact is on others? And what I found is the more specific you are with people, they're like, oh yeah, I thought I was self-aware, but now that I think about it, I don't have my, top 3 values articulated. So I think that's one place to start. Another place to start that we learned in developing this assessment is we can't be the sole determinants of how self-aware we are. And what our team and others have found is both data points matter. So how I see myself has unique value, as does how other people see me. And so if you're thinking about measuring your self-awareness, it's about getting both of those angles. And the one thing that I can offer your listeners, this is actually something we developed for the launch of Insight several years ago, but was so popular, we left it up. We have a 14-item subset of that assessment available for free. And what you do is you answer the 14 questions, and it asks those specifics. The system will send a questionnaire to somebody who knows you well, who will answer questions about how they see you. And then you'll get a report actually based on, what the findings are, with a couple of tips and tricks to help improve. And so if anybody wants to take that, it's totally free, no strings attached. You can go to www.insight-quiz.com.
That's awesome. I'm doing that right after we wrap up today. And we can
love it.
include that
I want you to tell me more.
As well. I will. I'll let you know what my score is.
Perfect.
Yeah, my book is, it's one thing I've been coming detached from. We in preparation for your keynote, our manager got us the Insight book. And so I read it, and so then all of a sudden COVID hit and everyone had to go home, work from home. And one of the things that's trapped in my cabinet at work is my Insights book.
Oh no. Well, we have to fix that. That is a very fixable problem.
I know, held hostage. So I've definitely been going to your site to kind of get, and I also subscribe to your newsletter, which is fantastic. So listeners, if you haven't done that yet, you should definitely do that. So there's lots of places to get, and the quiz is a fantastic one as well. So thanks for bringing that up, and we'll make sure to include that in our show notes because it's a really cool resource. So I love that now we've got the means, we kind of understand the importance of self-awareness, the different kinds, right? The importance of how do we find out if we are or not. And I got to imagine this is sort of, it's not something we're like, oh, I got results. I am self-aware. I'm not self-aware. Like, what do you recommend is sort of, because it seems like an ongoing, thing that you have to continue to work at. So how do you bring this up? Like, again, say I'm an HR professional. How do I make this an important piece of our culture or our leadership style, or even kind of our management educational track, right? Like, what have you seen work for businesses to put emphasis on self-awareness and make it part of the learning path, as you talked about, so important, in our office settings?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll make it really simple. Actually, there's sort of 2 ways you can do this. One of them works and one of them doesn't. The first is lip service. It's saying it's important. It's putting it in your competency model, but if the senior leaders, and specifically, the senior leadership team, are not modeling behaviors of self-awareness, it's going to be very difficult because, if anything, if I'm a mid-level manager and I'm being asked to get feedback, every week from, X number of people, and I don't see the folks above me leading the organization doing it, there's not a lot of credibility there. So I think the bottom line, and I'll talk about other things you can do, but there has to be an all-in commitment on the part of the senior leaders. And what I've found really interesting is there are a lot of CEOs and, C-level leaders who get coached in secret. So I think we would all be surprised to discover how many senior leaders and organizations have coaches, but nobody knows. And I think one of the best ways to begin to show how important self-awareness is to come out of the closet. I have a wonderful client that I coach who works at IBM, and he's in a very, very important job, just got a huge promotion. And yesterday, we actually filmed a video of him and I talking about the coaching process. And it was just so exciting because I thought about, the tens of thousands of people that were going to see this video and how they would see it modeled that, you can always get feedback. You can always learn to be better. Even, the most senior leaders don't know always, we're all learning as we go. So that's a big piece. I also think directly training on it is really important. Putting it in curriculum. It's sort of the way I see it is as the meta skill of the 21st century. In other words, we can only be as good at, things like sales or influence or leadership as we are self-aware. And a lot of my clients, especially in the last year, I would say, have been building it directly into their leadership development.
Yeah, those are great examples. I love that. I think, right, we look to our leaders, and if they're showing the importance and putting the work towards becoming self-aware, it makes sense that, it would be something that would ripple through the organization. And likewise, having the courage to say, hey, I need to work at this, and that's okay, right? I think speaks volumes, so to speak.
It's heroic, I think. There's a heroic aspect of that to be, brave enough and committed enough to bring other people in.
Yeah, fantastic. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I love it.
We can.
But we only have a 25-minute podcast here. But what I want to do is say someone wants to really dive into this a bit more and want to learn more. Tasha, where do you recommend they go to hear more about your book or to take that quiz? Is there a resource you can point them to?
There is actually. So the quiz is a great one. It's fast and easy, which people like nowadays, especially. We also actually just launched a brand new online course called the Future Ready Leader. And maybe we can give your listeners a discount. I think I can send you a link afterwards, but that's kind of like how to get totally immersed in it. But then there's also this element of a mindset and saying, I'm going to commit to getting more feedback, or I'm going to commit to, something as simple as identifying my top 3 values. I think anything we do is going to matter. And what I've discovered, again, researching this for so long, is that it's really about those incremental improvements. I think so many of us wait for that bolt of insight, like, oh, all of a sudden I see myself clearly. But what we saw and discovered in our unicorns is it's just this incremental daily, weekly, monthly process where over time, if you can get 1% more self-aware per week for the next year, that's major. That's a major improvement. And so I think, there's a lot of different ways and I have some ways available and others have other ways, but that would be my suggestion is whatever you do, think of one significant action that you're going to take to start that process.
I love it. I hope everyone who is listening just said, challenge accepted.
Not everybody is brave enough. So I would be so excited to hear that. We'll make the world more self-aware.
Absolutely.
We're going to have so many unicorns after this.
Yeah, right. I love it. 2021 is going to be fabulous.
Oh, I love that optimism. Well, this has been fantastic, Tasha. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been great just to kind of pick your brain on self-awareness and realizing how unself-aware I am and how we all have work to do on that. And thanks so much for the great resources that are available. You put in tons of research and work, and we're all going to benefit from it thanks to you. So much appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, we're all in this together. So happy to be a part of the cause.
Thanks, Tasha. Goodbye. WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal investment or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.